And so I say, give yourself little victories, give yourself little wins, face the little fears and start to overcome them. And then as you do over time, you'll develop this beautiful and brilliant momentum, which then you will just find yourself overcoming the bigger fears naturally. And so courage for me is built in little increments that stack on top of each other over time. So that's.
Hello, everyone. So, a quick introduction to part two of this exceptional interview that I just had the opportunity to go through as I'm editing and taking notes on it. And I've got to say, it's some really good stuff. So, enjoy.
Between our body and our soul, this connection from the micro to the macro, and we may innovate ourselves to evolve as fast as the technology does. So I look forward to that. And hope that humanity on a sociological level manages to combine virtue and value and love and compassion and these roots of the human spirit alongside our technological advances in the more physiological or biological realm. Call it a grandiose idea.
Man, I love it. I love it. Bob, you want to chime in? We're talking about human potential, or the examples of human potential.
Before Bob pops on, I've got one more thing to say.
Sure, go ahead.
If everyone listening right now hasn't had an opportunity to read a book or read studies on what's called flow thinking by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, please pick that up. Okay, another really, really great book is called The Rise of Superman by Steve Kotler and Jamie Wheel. And it's all about the fact that in the last, I think, 25 or 30 years, humanity has begun to hit a type of awakening of what we're capable of as a species that has been accelerated to an astronomical rate. I'm not going to quote this exactly, but something like in the 100 years that surfing has existed, I think the largest wave we had ever caught was something like 20 feet or 25 feet. And in the last 25 years, I think the largest wave that's been caught now is in the 70s, if not 80s. We've got guys that are snowboarding and jumping like entire ravines across mountain ranges. We've got versions of us that are putting on flying squirrel suits and flying within 10 feet off the ground, shooting through the middle of valleys and caverns. We're able to design underwater submersive vehicles that can take first aid into and through this really dynamic set of caverns to try and bring aid to children that are stuck in, like, it's, for me, it's just like where we are on the precipice of serious growth is beyond where we've been for the previous thousands and thousands of years. And I don't think that that's going to slow down. So little added thought there.
Good.
Go ahead, Bob.
Bob here.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm almost at a loss to try to answer the question of in what terms I see the human potential. I do believe that humans in various ways have the potential to become godlike in some meaningful ways. I actually wrote a story, one of the few pieces of fiction I've ever written. It's in Flourish. It's called The Real Story of Moses and the 10 Suggestions. And it's about the human potential. It's a fictional account of a conversation between Moses and God, in which God spells out the fact that humans have a potential to become godlike. I'm not sure we do as individuals, but I do believe that when we are sufficiently harmonious with each other, that the potential exists for our species as a whole to have a level of consciousness that we cannot aspire to individually. Like an ant colony has far more awareness than any one of the ants in it. As our bodies have a higher level of awareness and more potential than the individual cells. The cells in my body don't know about my consciousness, and yet here I am conscious. So abilities can transcend the components that make up that ability. And I see the possibility that in a foreseeable, though not necessary, future, that humans will have this ability to collectively make ethical decisions that are better decisions than any of us individually could make. And I see that as what I call a dimensional quadrature. And we've had a dimensional quadrature in the past when we evolved to the point where we have awareness of our awareness. When we became able, through evolution, to reflect on our own experience, that was a really big deal. It gave us what we now call consciousness. I'm looking forward, probably it won't happen in my lifetime, but I'm looking forward to a time when we become conscious of our consciousness, the next dimensional quadrature. If and when that happens, automatically, all of the things that we see as evils in the world today would stop. Will we make it there? I don't know. We could exterminate ourselves before we get there. But while there are some of us who can still see these possibilities, there is hope. And I'll go with that to the best of my ability. And I know you will too.
Yeah, I have a thought to add if there's time for it. So coming around full circle, this is actually really important. We've covered the basis. Basically, the greatest human weaknesses have to do with our epistemological understanding of the world, of ourselves. So it's about knowledge, understanding, and overcoming ignorance, right? And how else do we do that besides what all of us are talking about? We do that through psychological coming to terms with ourselves. We come to terms with technological advancement. We keep creating and we keep building. That's why this constant reference back to creating a God, right? And to kind of play off what Johnny was, when he was detailing the human potential movement, how human potential is actually increasing exponentially. It's the same thing for technology, right? Now we're building all these decentralized technologies. We have the cryptocurrencies that are cropping up that are changing the face of money and allowing us to decentralize our efforts, which actually provides more awareness for people, more understanding, because in a way, and I don't mean this aggressively, but it's forced, right? People have to come to terms with the way that the world's changing, with the way that the paradigm's shifting. All of these changes that are coalescing have to do with us brushing off the ignorance and coming to terms with who we are as a species, right? It's like we're being midwifed into a new age of humanity. And it's actually absolutely beautiful to witness. And we're all on the front lines of it, right? Because of the internet and because of technologies, we have the voluntarist anarchist movement blowing up right now, where people are starting to realize, well, violence is not a way to solve problems. And now we're escaping the groupthink, right? Because now we have all these communication channels that have opened up that are allowing the ignorance to dissipate. It's absolutely wonderful. So yeah, we've come around full circle in the conversation. And I think what we're doing is we're beating back those handicaps that we have as humans through technology and through greater psychological understanding that has come through a mixture of technology and also a mixture of advancement in psychology, in human understanding, in sociology, et cetera. And it's absolutely wonderful to be part of.
Well, that kind of leads right into the third question, which I'll put out at this point, and then we can finish. We can conclude with a discussion about that. But as a community, what is one thing you would recommend we do to further our progress away from our weaknesses and toward our strengths and raising our consciousness? Sterling, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, so I think that there's some really good answers to this. We know that we function better in smaller communities, tight-knit groups. There is a very limited number of relationships that we can have with people and that we can sustain on an emotional and an interpersonal level. And if we can make that happen on a environmental, on a systemic scale, we're going to be able to push forward into the future with a lot more stamina, with a lot more appreciation of what's to come, with a lot more understanding. And this is how I would go about doing it, or how I would how I personally look at it happening. We need to implement as many agorist systems as possible. For anybody who doesn't know, agorism is the idea that we fight back against the state and we fight back against authoritarians by connecting with each other and trading with each other and teaching each other skills, doing skill shares. So this is also a greater part of the decentralization movement. If we're in these smaller agoristic communities, we're actually building the skills and knowledge and compassion that we need to move into the future as a community. And we also will fight back against the groupthink and the ignorance because of these smaller groups. And this is something that we were likely part of in the earlier stages of mankind. We probably existed in small tribes and had close connections with each other. And I'm not saying that that was the Paleolithic man wasn't a perfect example of mankind's coming to age in terms of morality, but at least we had stronger connections during those time periods. But now we have a lot more understanding. We're older as a species, and coming back to this communitarian focus and agoristic focus, I think, will help us train in on the future and continue to grow as a species and come to terms with human potential and where we're going.
How about you, Johnny? You want to chime in?
I have such a simple response compared to Sterling's brilliant plan. And that is simply this: education, 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 education. And I don't mean formal education, like you have to go to some collegiate university or anything like that. I mean literally just learning, exploring what's within and allowing it to be pulled out through reading, through journaling, through meditation, through exploration, through meeting with small groups of like-minded individuals who can provide that kind of feedback for you in order for you to see yourself in new ways. For me, the answer is always in seeing and perceiving choice. I don't know if either one of you have ever experienced this before, but when you find yourself in what you feel to be a no-win situation, and you can perceive no other way out or no other choice available to you, there is nothing more exhausting for the human spirit than to feel powerless or helpless or controlless. And so for me, the ability to extend or reach beyond just the quickly perceived options or choices you have available to you in the given moment is a matter of adding more to you and being able to give yourself a really fertile ground to be able to give yourself the chance to get creative, to innovate, to find your voice and how you want to add it to the choir, no matter what way that is. Because from my experience, you can even get locked into the group think of a tiny group, which then you're just as stuck in. And so for me, when you have access to reading amazing books from authors from all of time, from being able to read new research and understand it, actually understand what it is you're reading so that you know you're not going to just take a statistic at face value, that you are able to look at research and add a critical mind to it and check your assumptions by reading opposite points of view, by taking on new perspectives, by being willing to allow others to challenge you, whether they're alive or dead. Just the words of many poets have challenged me immensely on an emotional level, even though it's been hundreds of years since they wrote them. Our ability to pass this written word and to educate ourselves and each other over the course of a long period of time is what is my opinion on what this community is in dire need of, so that we don't feel like we're even locked into one choice within just the crypto community, and being able to see that technology as having its own next evolution, which all comes from listening to others' creativity, others' innovations, and then seeing where you can find that fusion in yourself. And so that dynamic interplay of education amongst bigger groups. That's my 2 cents.
That's excellent, Johnny. Thank you. All right, Bob.
Well, I'm sure you know some of my answer, and that is that, yeah, education is key. A lot of education isn't very relevant to solving the big problem. I see the big problem as our institutions, human institutions for the most part, consistently make unethical decisions. That's the thing that I see has to change. It can change. And I see that as a community, the level at which we need to be, I think we need to be working on that, is if two people can be really honest with each other, if two people can lower their defenses to a point of totally trusting each other, those two people can expand that circle to a small group. 8 people, maybe 10, maybe 12, but it's a small group. You probably all know that I am one of the co-inventors of the Octalog, and there's a reason for the Octalog. It's because in a small group, you can learn to be really honest with each other. It means being honest with yourself. That's the key. Communally, it still comes down to, if I want to relate well with you, I'd better know who I am. I can't go on having amnesia for big portions of my life, like my first 5 years. I can't go on having amnesia for how I got to be who I am and still be really honest. So I think that the community thing that hasn't happened, needs to happen, is a move towards developing group trust through self-knowledge. And this, done right, in my experience, not just an idea, but I have experience with this, this means that we get to be very close to each other, very honest with each other. Relationships bloom and blossom, and wonderful things happen. I've experienced this, but it only happens when we reach a certain level of self-honesty. And this means maximizing the 4 values that I espouse: truth, awareness, creativity, and love. By expanding self-knowledge, these 4 values increase, and as a result of that, a side effect, we get peace, prosperity, and freedom. So, to me, the community thing that has to happen seems to be this developing groups that can be that honest with each other. And this is what I've been working at for a long time, and it's starting to come together here in Mexico. And I'm very excited about it, and I'm excited to share about it. We've got a workshop coming up next month to teach a group of people who are mostly English-speaking Mexicans, to teach them this technology of being honest with each other and exploring our own past, figuring out how we got to be who we are, recovering lost memories, and becoming far more in line with human potential than we have been previously. So this is an ongoing thing that I've been working at for a long time, and I want to share it with the world because it has made such a huge difference in my life and the lives of other people who've kind of jumped in and learned about it. It's not, for example, haphazard that my guest, Kenton, has come all the way from China to study this stuff, because he has recognized the value of it in his life. It has totally changed his life in many positive ways. And if it can do that for him, why not for thousands or millions or billions of other people? We have the mechanisms for making that happen. We're putting them into play. Hallelujah. We're on the path. We blazed the trail to a future world of peace, prosperity, and freedom. And now we're looking for the pioneers who want to come out and get involved and do some more exploring. So I see this as a very, very hopeful and hope-inspiring circumstance that each of us is sitting in the middle of right now.
You know, we began this with the, talking about courage. And I think one of the things that I think you guys are all probably aware of is a lot of people are confronted with the fear of confronting their own self or confronting their own beliefs and learning that maybe what they thought they believe isn't what they actually believe or isn't actually serving them well. How do people confront fear? How do we encourage people to confront their own fears? Sterling, why don't you go?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really tough question to answer, and I think it could be different for everybody. But I always recommend the best way to confront fear is 5 grams of psilocybin mushrooms in a dark room at night, as Terrence McKenna recommended. No, in all seriousness, I'll just speak from personal experience. Before I woke up to who I was, I spent all day long escaping reality through some kind of mechanism or channel. I would play video games literally all day long. I didn't want to deal with another person if I could keep from it. And what this ultimately was me engaging in the consensus trance, right? Not wanting to be involved with the world around me or myself. But it was also me just wanting to escape the difficulties and challenges of life. And coincidentally, someone introduced me to MDMA, and I took MDMA. And because this is such a powerful drug for allowing people to empathize, but get this, you don't just empathize with other people. The key here is you empathize with yourself. And that's what I did. I had such a strong degree of self-empathy that I was able to look at my past traumas and really be very kind to myself and say, listen, this wasn't your fault. It is something that you had to deal with, and now you can overcome it. That's what I told myself at the time that I took MDMA. And this really allowed me to confront a lot of my fears about self-discovery, about wanting to do more with my life, and also trying to tackle the big prominent fear a lot of people have, and that's the fear of success or the fear of failure, depending on who you are. If you have either one of these fears and you're trying to make something of yourself, it's going to be very easy for you to escape and to try to get out of that. So, and I often say this online, each person has their own MDMA, right? I took MDMA and this is what helped me try to start conquering it. And by no means am I perfect. I still suffer a lot and I still have a lot of challenges. I'm still human and I still escape from time to time. But I'm willing to admit that, and I'm willing to try to do whatever I can to overcome those challenges. And each person has to find what it is that will help them confront their fears. And it's not easy because, I mean, we're mortal creatures with all kinds of psychological hangups and traumatic baggage that we have to deal with. And it's trying to find out how we can overcome that and reach our full potential. That's a real challenge. So I encourage everyone to find their own MDMA. And I wouldn't say it's a bad thing to actually try that if they ever have a chance. So harm reduction, though, super important. Always know what you're putting in your body. Caveat.
How about you, Johnny?
Well, I want to hear Bob's.
All right, let's go to Bob.
Chemicals in enhancing awareness. I have been observing people doing that with MDMA and pot and psilocybin and quite a variety, ayahuasca, and so on. There are lots of chemicals and chemical combinations that can affect increases in awareness. Now, I want to suggest that even though there are people out there saying everybody needs this chemical or this hallucinogen in order to fix their lives, this is not so in my observation. I have seen people, more than one, who have used, for example, ayahuasca in a way that has helped them to recover from traumas that occurred when they were 4 or 5 years old. What I have also observed in those same people is that, not infrequently, that exacerbates the effects of traumas that happened earlier. So if you were traumatized when you were 1 year old or 6 months old or a year and a half old, those traumas can be made the effects of those traumas can be made worse by the use of the hallucinogens. And it's important to understand the character structure of the individual. If you're going to, for example, say, oh, well, you would benefit from this chemical, you better know, when were they traumatized? Were they traumatized really early or later? If they were traumatized later, these chemicals are probably very helpful. But if it was earlier, I'd say it's contraindicated because it makes the earlier trauma effects worse. And I've observed this. It's really a sad thing when it happens, but I've observed it happening over a long period of time. So what was the other part of the question?
Well, just how do people conquer their fears? So what's your suggestion?
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, a certain amount of fear is a good thing under some circumstances. I'm reminded of the story I heard from John Grinder, co-inventor of NLP. He told a story about how he did a workshop one time, and he taught the group a procedure that he called the phobia cure. A phobia is generally understood to be a fear that is more intense than is appropriate for caution. And in that workshop, as a demonstration, he took a woman who had a fear of heights. She couldn't stand on a chair without being terrified. And he removed her phobia using NLP, a procedure that he called the phobia cure. And then during the break in the workshop, someone came running up to him and said, that woman, you removed her fear. She's up on the 10th floor now, walking along the railing of the balcony outside her room. A very risky thing to do. Well, he went up to her room and reinstalled just enough fear so that she had a certain amount of caution approaching balconies, and she stopped walking on the railings, but she could still walk out on the balcony and look down. So it's important to have just the right amount of fear. It's not okay. It's not helpful to say do away with fear entirely, nor is it okay to amplify fear to where we become paralyzed to do things that we should be able to do. So I'm saying that adjusting our fears is a better strategy than trying to eliminate them or brute force overcome them. You know, if you are brute forced into a situation that you're terrified of, chances are you're going to be paralyzed by fear, and that situation is going to be damaging to you. That's not a good outcome. I don't like that outcome. Do you? So let's learn to adjust our fears so we have enough caution to go on amplifying our creativity, truth, awareness, and love. That's my outlook on that.
Wonderful. Johnny, how about your response? We're getting pretty close to our time, so if anybody needs to tap out.
Don't worry, I promise my response is not going to be wordy. I work with fear a great deal as an executive coach and as a charisma coach. I deal with a great deal of people who have been rejected and traumatized in many different moments in their lives, and as a result feel apart from people and not a part of something. And so fear is something that I am intimate with, not just within myself and having had to face my own and deal with my own, but helping others all over the world deal with theirs. And I want to make this really pragmatic and practical for anybody that's actually stayed with the four of us all the way through this call. And that is this. Number one, there is an important distinction between danger and fear. Okay, danger is very real, like Bob spoke about. There are things that you need to be cautious of. I do not recommend that you go and stand on the edge of a building 16 stories up when you don't need to, or it doesn't get you something. Okay, now, if that's something that's needed, your choice. You're an adult. Manage your life accordingly. But for me, there is a very important distinction between what is dangerous and what is the story we add to that. And for me, that's what fear is about. And there's a line from a movie called After Earth, which is with Will Smith. Not his greatest movie or his greatest cinematic adventure by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a great line in it where he says to his son, "Don't take this wrong, but danger is very real, but fear is not." And noticing the difference between them. Our ability to predict that I spoke about earlier, our ability to look into the future and attempt to predict what is possible is the same root that fear sits within. So to try and get rid of fear is to try and get rid of the predictive mechanism, which is impossible. So even if we wanted to get rid of it, at this point in time, I don't see any way to. Okay, that doesn't mean we won't be capable of it in the future. Okay, but knowing the difference and creating that distinction is the first thing I would do. Okay, the second is stop believing in your own hype. Like, you're creating that in your head. It is literally an imaginary thing going on inside of you. So I actually like to use what I call the doubting mechanism, which normally haunts people, okay, to actually use it to my benefit, which is if I start to get really, really afraid of something, I go, really? Really? Is it really going to happen just like that? Is everything really going to work out just the way I'm imagining it right now? And I start to question it. Okay? And as soon as you start questioning it, it opens up the gateway for you to start entertaining a lot more possibilities of what could occur. Okay? For me, use doubt as a tool to dismantle your fears. Okay? And the third one I wanted to bring up is the most important one for me, and that is risk small, but risk often. And that is for you to overcome your biggest fears. It's natural for the human experience to seek where we have faced our fears and overcome them. When we look at something like a big fear, it can appear very overwhelming to look at. Well, if you break it down into its smallest subset components and you build these little victories and little wins over smaller fears over time, you get to develop the belief that you're capable of becoming more than whatever that imagined event is. And then what you do is you take that fear, and suddenly over time it squishes itself down into really what it's really about. And so I say, give yourself little victories, give yourself little wins, face the little fears and start to overcome them. And then as you do over time, you'll develop this beautiful and brilliant momentum, which then you will just find yourself overcoming the bigger fears naturally. And so courage for me is built in little increments that stack on top of each other over time. So those are my three things. Know the distinction between danger and fear. Don't believe in your own hype. Use doubt to dismantle what it is you think you're thinking. And the third thing is risk small, but risk often.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, I really greatly appreciate your participation in this. It was an idea I had, and I'm so glad that I took the chance to make this happen. I think this is an area of discussion that I think our community really needs to focus on a lot more, and I hope we get a chance to revisit this, because I know there's probably 50 things we could go into in regard to some of the things that we talked about. I've got a couple projects myself that I think are in this arena, and actually, Sterling, if you got a few minutes afterwards, I'd like to talk to you about one of those things.
Sure.
But with all that said, thank you everyone for joining me, and I greatly appreciate it. And I hope to see you again real soon. And if not,